This is Rock and Roll English. Real people, real English. Here's your host, Martin Johnston.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll English. Episode number 73, and we have a very special show today. It's sort of like an anniversary because it's been 1 year since we created the podcast. So we thought, let's have a sort of anniversary party. I know it's a bit strange to give yourself a party, but that's what we're doing. Quickly, there was a problem with the website this week. Sorry about that. It's working now, although it still does look a bit shit. I just need to do some stuff on it when I get the time. I can't really be bothered at the moment, which means I don't really have the energy, but I will do it and make it look rock and roll again. So enjoy the conversation about me and Dan talking about the podcast's anniversary. And remember, all of the rock and roll vocabulary is on the website, rockandrollenglish.com. So go there after you listen and, do some stuff with the vocabulary. Anyway, I will stop talking now and I will speak to you again at the end. Dan the man, how are you today?
I'm good, how are you?
Fantastic, Dan, as always. So how are your New Year's resolutions going?
Very well, actually. I went snowboarding / skiing yesterday.
Okay. What? Snowboarding or skiing?
I went both because I started snowboarding and then I had to change to skiing because it was too difficult.
That's what we love to hear. We saw a picture of your experience, but why don't you just tell us a little bit more about it?
It was one of the most embarrassing days of my life.
That's what we like to hear.
Well, after I changed to skis, me and Mrs. Dan the man went up to the adult slopes.
Adult? So before you're on the baby slopes?
Well, yeah, just, finding our feet. It was...
lovely rock and roll vocabulary there. Finding our feet. We were getting used to it.
Yeah. So we went up to the adult, the big slopes, and we went down the wrong one. And we went down one of the more advanced slopes. And obviously almost killed ourselves, but Mrs. Dan the man hurt her lip. Her knee hit her head. Anyway, we tried to get down the mountain, went and told someone, and they sent a ambulance scooter to pick us up.
So you got rescued by an ambulance?
Yes.
Well, the main thing, Dan, is that Mrs. Dan the man is safe, okay? We're not as concerned about you, but sure. Okay, that's a bonus. Yeah.
That wasn't the only embarrassing thing that happened. After we'd been taken down the mountain, I went back onto the baby slopes and I got pulled aside by one of the instructors there, and he told me my helmet was on the wrong way around.
So helmet is the thing on your head to stop you smashing your head and killing yourself. And that was obviously too difficult for Dan the man to put on his head. Anyway, that's what we like to start the show with, Dan. Some embarrassing stories about you. But then what do we do?
A review.
Yes, exactly. So I noticed we have actually a lot of reviews, but I didn't know, again, because I just randomly searched on iTunes and found quite a lot, Dan. This one is from Latin Dancer 2014. And it says, one of the best podcasts for learning real English in a compelling way. From Giuseppe from Pisa, who obviously, I imagine, is a Latin dancer. So thanks a lot for that, Mr. Latin Dancer. And remember, if you do write a review, please let me know in some way on Facebook or via the website, and we will read it because there aren't that many reviews. So if you do let me know, we will read it. Anyway, Dan, we have a special show today. Mm-hmm. Do you know why?
It's the anniversary, isn't it? It's our anniversary, Martin.
Yes, the podcast anniversary, that is, of 1 year of the podcast. Remember, there is no sexual relationship between me and Dan. Okay, we've said it before and we'll say it again.
I think you're saying it too much now. People are starting to think
it might be true.
Yeah.
So, to celebrate, Dan the Man has made you a present, haven't you, Dan?
I have, yes.
But you have to listen to the end of the podcast to understand what it is, because otherwise you'll probably switch off after like a minute. So this gives you an incentive to listen to the end. But in general, what do you think of anniversaries, Dan?
I don't know really.
I fucking hate them. What really fucks me off, remember, if you say fucks me off, it means makes me angry, is people expect me to remember their anniversaries.
That's not true, though.
It is. You in England, you have to buy a card for someone to say happy anniversary.
Who?
Well, like my brother.
Your brother asks you to buy him a card.
Well,
for
he
his
doesn't, but
anniversary.
I know he expects it. Obviously, I don't get him one, but I know he expects it, and he thinks I'm a shit brother because I don't get him one. But anyway, that's enough about those kind of...
When's your anniversary, by the way?
What anniversary? This is the anniversary of the podcast, Dan.
I mean, you and Mrs. Rock and Roll English. When's your anniversary? Have you decided on that?
I like that, Mrs. Rock and Roll English.
Well, hang on. You like it. You chose that.
Well, kind of. Yeah, no, we haven't had any anniversaries yet, Dan. Anyway, let me start the show, okay? The anniversary show. So, obviously, we're talking about the podcast and things like why we started, the beginning of the podcast, how we make it. Then we're going to ask each other some questions. More, I'm going to ask Dan questions about the best moments and the worst moments of this year on the podcast. You okay with that, Dan?
Yeah, why not?
Well then, let's rock and roll, baby. So, why we started? Why did we start, Dan?
I can't even remember, to be honest.
Well, I think I started and I said to you, do you want to come on this podcast? That's why you started.
Yeah, I think so.
But I started because I love podcasts and I had a few students that were interested. So I thought, why not? Let's do this shit. But the beginning of the podcast, okay, this is very interesting because many people do not know, well, in fact, I don't think anyone knows, that Dan and I started this many years before, didn't we, Dan?
Mm-hmm. Embarrassingly.
Well, I obviously had the idea to make a podcast. So in 2013, it was, Dan and I used to record a kind of podcast in a car after playing football.
In the dark.
Yeah, so we'd play football on a Thursday evening, and then we would drive to the car park of a supermarket, Tesco's, if you're asking, and record a podcast. And luckily, we still have one of those recordings. Well, I still have it.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so I thought we could play this now. So you must remember, we recorded this on my mobile phone. There were no microphones. Well, not that they didn't exist in 2013, but we didn't use them. And it is extremely shit. But, it's the anniversary, Dan, okay? We're sharing these moments with everyone. So, are you ready?
Okay.
Here it is. Oh, one last thing. The idea of this podcast was to talk about football. And if you don't like football, don't worry, because we don't really talk about football in this podcast. So, as I said, here you go. It's 2 minutes. It is shit. So please stay with us. Remember, Dan's giving you a present at the end. So stay with us. So here we are again. Magic Martin and Desperate Dan.
You alright?
That means hello.
Oh yeah, hello.
Have you got your music, Dan?
I have. Oh, hang on.
He will be sacked soon. He can do nothing right. His one job is to provide the music, and he cannot even do that. My God. Anyway, let's move straight forward to the podcast. So, this week's vocabulary, a phrasal verb, to let someone down. What does it mean, Dan?
To disappoint.
Dan often lets me down.
I do my best.
So, as you can see, nothing changes. Dan still lets me down now.
Yeah, that is awful.
Yeah, it's not the best. I used to send it to some of my old students, and funnily enough, it didn't take off. So what do I mean when I say it didn't take off, Dan?
No one liked it.
Well, it didn't become successful, let's say. We didn't make so many of them, luckily, but that's where the idea started. And then, the idea was, inside for a few years, but I didn't have the bottle to take action. What does that mean, Dan? Didn't have the bottle.
It means you didn't have the courage to take action, which
Yes.
is quite a common theme for you.
Well, this is it, Dan. It takes a lot of bottle, so courage, to do something like that. Because when you when you put out a podcast, you open yourself up for criticism. So it's a big step, Dan. So that's why it took me about 4 years after that to actually do it. But, all's well that ends well, Dan.
Yeah,
Okay?
I think it was easier for you, though, having me on the show, because you directed all the negative attention towards me.
Well, that's it, Dan, okay? I needed someone to sort of release my negativity on, and you were perfect for that. So, yeah, that was like the first experiment, and then for the next sort of 4 years, probably, I was talking to Dan about it. But many people also don't know that the very first episode of the podcast, which you can still listen to now because it's on iTunes, etc., was recorded 6 months before the actual time it went out. It was recorded in May 2016, and I actually released it in January 2017. And
That's 7 months, Martin.
Oh, well, more or less, Dan. And even that is absolutely shit. And I thought we could also listen to the first few seconds of that one.
God.
Dan's excited about it. I hope you are as well. Let's have a listen.
This is Rock and Roll English. Real people, real English.
So, hello and welcome to Rock and Roll English. Today on the show we have Daniel Gandolfi. You want to say hello, Dan?
Hello.
Very, very exciting. So, Dan, are you ready to rock and roll?
I am ready to rock and roll, Martin. Thank you for having me.
Okay, no problem. I can assure you there are at least 3 people listening to this show. So, in some ways, you are famous.
Who's listening?
Well, not right now, but
No, not right now, but who will be listening? Anyone important?
three of my students.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
when you come, you can sign autographs for them. So,
Will there be groupies?
of course.
That sound quality is absolutely dreadful.
That's because you didn't have a microphone, Dan. That's how amateur we were back then. And then I had to buy Dan a microphone, okay? So the mic you listen to that you hear Dan speaking on, I paid with my own money because Dan wouldn't buy one. The
Yeah,
tight bastard. Remember, tight, someone that doesn't like spending money.
Yeah, it cost you what? $6.99?
$16.99.
Okay.
And if you notice there in the first episode, I said there will be at least 3 people listening. I don't think we arrived at 3 people for that.
Was your mum one of the listeners?
Oh, yeah, she was one, yeah. That was one,
Okay.
and I don't know who the other person was. I think I paid a friend to to listen to it. And you will also notice a lot of background noise of Dan moving around, being a fidget. A fidget is someone that moves a lot, and is the word I used a lot when I did the recent episode with my 5-year-old niece that cannot keep still. And that is exactly like Dan. Now you don't hear it because I actually edit all of the background noises of Dan doing stuff like this and fidgeting.
And I'm sat on my hands now.
This is what we had. We had to actually make a rule of Dan sitting on his hands. And there are actually a few outtakes that we have, especially of this, of Dan making noise. And I have one here that you can listen to very quickly. The clicking, by the way, is getting out of control. You are adding, I would say, nearly an hour onto my editing.
I think it's this chair you're hearing.
Well, get a new in fact, that sounds a lot like it when you just did that.
It's the desk.
Get a new chair. Get a new desk.
I'm not buying a new
Yeah, but
desk.
use a different one.
There is no another desk.
But what about the one in the living room?
People come in and out. It'll be a nightmare. I'll put my hands. I won't move. Touch the desk. It's fine. Go. And I never actually bought that desk.
He didn't buy the desk. he just decided to sit on his hand. So thanks a lot, Dan. So let's have a look at how we record it. I think people know, but some people still don't know that we actually record these on Skype.
Looking at each other.
Looking at each other, yeah. But I tried to put the sort of picture of Dan away from me because it sort of puts me off. What does it mean if something puts you off, Dan?
It distracts you in a bad way.
Yeah, exactly. So I try and put him at the very bottom of the screen, but I like to just have him in the corner of my eye just so I can see he's not doing anything stupid. Like, I want to make sure he's sitting on his hands, okay?
Yeah.
So
wise.
Exactly, very wise. We have done a few live ones though, haven't we, Dan? Face to face.
Yeah, they're horrible.
Yeah, we don't really sort of enjoy them very much. I don't know why. I think it's because we're used to doing it like this, Dan. Remember there when I said used to doing, followed by the ing there. Yeah, I think it's just because we're used to this. Yeah, so then we record on Skype and then Dan sends me his audio file, which we've had some problems with that in the past, haven't we, Dan, as well?
Have we?
Yes, you very often forget to send me that audio file and then I can't edit the podcast.
That's not true. I don't forget. It's just, it takes a while to arrive.
Yeah, sure, like 5 days. No, that definitely has happened many times. So that's another example of Dan letting me down. Remember how he sort of disappoints me. I've also had to edit out many other noises of Dan. Drinking tea is a common one of Dan just going with his cup of tea. That's a very common one. We're supposed to be sort of professionals and Dan's like slurping on some tea. So slurping is exactly that. We've had an incident once of in the middle of the conversation, Dan had a £1 coin, some money, and was just hitting it on the table. And when I was talking, I had to stop and say, Dan, what the fuck are you doing? This is about the quality of the sound and you're hitting money on the table.
Yeah.
So these are some other
what about
examples.
You? What have you done? There must be. Is this list you've curated just about me?
Well, yeah, I don't know. You tell me, Dan. I can't think of things that I do that make noises. I'm not a fidget like you.
You often change the arranged date.
Well, I'm a busy man, Dan. Okay, we don't all just sit around in the south of France doing fuck all. Remember, fuck all is doing nothing. So I'm a busy man. Okay, I've got shit to do. But yeah, no, that does happen quite a lot, and then that confuses Dan because he's very solid, like he's very set in his ways, which is a nice term, which means like if you try to change something that he likes, it's just too much for him.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I like order.
Exactly, and if you change the date, oh god,
I'll make it as difficult as possible for you.
And he does exactly that by not sending me the podcast. So I thought we could talk about things that we can be proud of, Dan. Things that we have done well. Give ourselves a pat on the back. So if you give someone a pat on the back, it's like almost touching them on the back to say well done, let's say. Mm-hmm. So what can we be proud of, Dan?
Well, that anyone listens to the show.
Yeah, well, we've increased from like 3 listeners to the beginning to, I don't know now, but yeah, there are quite a lot. And the thing I thought we can be proud of is that we have not missed a show in a year. Well, maybe one actually, because I forgot my microphone.
Yeah. Yes.
But one in a year is not bad, hey Dan?
I think it's great. And we were doing 2 a week for a long time.
Yes, exactly. That was absolutely mental work. Because like each podcast takes about 8 hours, I say. So we were doing 2 a week. Well, the editing, stuff like that. So we were doing 2 a week, 16 hours a week of, hard work we were doing. Mm-hmm. God, we are fucking brilliant, aren't we, Dan? Well, I mean, saying that, of those 8 hours, Dan was doing about 30 minutes. But
yeah, they were hard 30 minutes, though. Very hard.
But still, 30 minutes times 2, Dan, that's 1 hour. So,
There you go. Every week.
Exactly, for a long time. So that's a lot of work. And I thought I'd ask you this, Dan. Why do you think people listen?
I've honestly got no idea. People don't listen to me in waking life. So I don't know why anyone would care to listen to me.
In what life?
Waking life,
I actually don't know what that means. What does that mean?
I don't know myself. I think it means in real life.
Thanks a lot, Dan, for bringing this rock and roll vocabulary. We will give a fantastic explanation of this.
What I mean is, people don't listen to me in person.
Yeah, normal life, let's say.
Yeah.
This is the most surprising thing, and Dan really is surprised by this. He's basically, every time I talk to him, just says, I can't believe people listen to us. But people do, Dan. Why? I'm not sure either. Maybe they can let us know. But I thought about the best and worst moments. So what's been the best moment for you, Dan? Notice there I said what has been the best moment for you?
Probably a few weeks ago when someone compared me to James Bond.
Oh yeah, to Daniel Craig. Yeah, I forgot about that.
I think that was the most exceptional moment of my life, to be honest.
Yeah, that was one of my worst moments, actually.
Yeah. What about you?
Best moment, probably the picture of you on the toilet with a potato in your mouth.
Oh, God, I forgot about
that. Next question, obviously, is worst moment, but have I just answered that question for you?
No, I think losing the referendum was the lowest point.
I tell you, if you had won that, I would have killed myself. What conditional is that, Dan?
Third.
Oh, boom shakalaka. After only 1 year, Dan the man has got a conditional question right. Third conditional, that's right, because we're talking about the past, Dan. If you had won that, I would have killed myself.
We're all learning English here.
Well, that's it, Dan. And another, bad moment for me was when you got my mum to make that video, which was extremely embarrassing.
Yeah, and you had said to me I didn't have the intellect to...
Well, I think that spurred you on, actually. So if something spurs you on, it sort of gives you the incentive to do it. I stupidly said to Dan...
I'd already had that ready to go.
Sure. No, I stupidly said to Dan, I don't think you're intelligent enough to organise something like that, like I did for his birthday, and then that spurred you on. That gave you the incentive.
Yeah. Watch yourself.
Yeah. Anyway, we've more or less come to the end of our anniversary, Dan. Now, probably later, we can go out for a romantic dinner, hey?
Have we ever gone out to dinner?
Just me and you? Yeah. We must have. What are you talking about? Well, we've been on holiday together, Dan. What did we do? Not go out to a restaurant?
Yeah, I guess so. It certainly wasn't romantic, though.
And a nice, funny story about this. When we were in... it was actually here in Palermo. Dan came to see me, and we had a bet on something in the day where the loser had to stand up at the table for the winner. Dan lost the bet. We went to the restaurant. I went to the toilet, and when I come back, I just made an indication with my hand to Dan to get up because I was there, and he had to stand up of his chair and wait for me to sit down.
Yeah, that was awful. That was awful.
That's the kind of shit that we do, okay? I don't know. It must be one of the reasons people listen to us. I don't know. I can't understand it either. Anyway, tell us about this present, Dan.
Yes, I've made a present because it's our anniversary, and people will just have to go to the Facebook post, put a comment on this episode, and they will be sent the present.
Oh, so the mystery is not over yet. This is Dan the man and his mysterious ways. We know Dan is a mysterious character, and that is continuing.
Or, if people don't use Facebook, they should just contact us on the website, and then we'll find a way to give you the present.
Sure. I like it, Dan. It's mysterious, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to the present. I'm sure everyone is.
You're not getting one.
Well, I want one, okay? I want one.
Well, you have to comment on the post then.
All right, well, I will comment, okay? I'll get that present, okay? I'm getting that fucking present, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for your time, Dan. Happy anniversary again.
Yeah, happy anniversary. Yeah, you could have got me a card.
Well, I told you I don't buy cards for anniversaries, okay?
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, who knows? Maybe this time next year we may have another anniversary.
Fingers crossed, eh? Fingers crossed. All right. We'll see you later, Dan.
Yeah. All right. Speak to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. So that was Dan the man and me speaking about our or the podcast's anniversary, remember to comment on the Facebook post to receive this gift from Dan the Man. And don't worry, it is free. Okay? So before we do the rock and roll vocabulary, some just small things I thought I would like to say, share some, wisdom with you, is that obviously I hope you enjoyed listening to those terrible podcasts we made at the beginning, but it's a lesson to anyone because things do get better if you try and if you practice. Well, hopefully it's a bit better now than it was when we were recording in a car. But I don't know. You tell me. And one other thing I forgot to mention is that in the name Rock and Roll English, there is actually a grammatical mistake. So this must be the only Learning English podcast that has a grammatical mistake in the title. There should be 2 apostrophes. There is only one. And that, I don't know how that happened, but that's quite embarrassing. So, there's another lesson for you. It doesn't have to be perfect for it to work. Anyway, let's look at that rock and roll vocabulary. At the beginning, Dan the Man said that he was going on the baby slopes of the skiing because he needed to find his feet. So that expression, to find your feet, is to get used to something, for something to become normal. We had fuck me off when I said anniversaries fuck me off, which means they make me angry. We had let me down when I said Dan lets me down, like he disappoints me. We had that in the old podcast and in this podcast. So, there's a trend there. And speaking about the old podcast, I said it didn't take off. So when something takes off, obviously an aeroplane takes off, that's more of a literal sense. But if something like a project takes off, it means like have success. In this case, it didn't. So I said it didn't take off. We had the word bottle, which obviously is something you can drink out of. But in English slang, it means like courage. So if you have the bottle or you don't have the bottle, it means you have or don't have courage. We had the word tight again, had that a few times because Dan was too tight to buy a microphone because he didn't want to spend money. And I also called him a fidget, like I called my 5-year-old niece, because he moves a lot, makes a lot of noise and creates a lot of problems for me when I edit the podcast. And we also had the term put me off when I said that Dan puts me off. So I put his picture in the bottom part of the screen when we record the podcast. So that's like it sort of disturbs you in a negative way. Obviously, if you're reading or something and someone's shouting like ow, 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 I imagine that will put you off reading. We had the word slurp when Dan was slurping on his tea, like that, which was great. Fuck all we had again when I said Dan does fuck all, which means he does nothing. Obviously not a nice thing to say, but quite funny between friends. I said Dan is very set in his ways. This is a very nice term and in my opinion explains Dan the Man very well. Someone that has their way of doing things and will not change, is set in their ways like Dan. We had pat on the back. So if you give yourself a pat on the back, it's like to say well done. Generally you give someone else a pat on the back, but there was no one to do that for me and Dan, so we had to give ourselves a pat on the back. Dan also had this thing when he said people don't listen to him in waking life, which I've done some research, means normal life, but, nobody uses that, so probably don't. I also saw there's a film called that, so that's probably where Dan heard that term. And a really nice term, probably the most rock and roll piece of vocabulary used by me, sure, was when I said that what I said to Dan about him not being intelligent spurred him on to make the video. It gave him the incentive to do it. I still think that's true, if you're asking. Anyway, all of this vocabulary is on the website, rockandrollenglish.com. Go there. Remember to comment on the Facebook post to get the free gift from the mystery Dan the Man. And enjoy that. And, have a good week. And just keep on rocking, baby.
Thanks so much for listening to Rock and Roll English. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit rockandrollenglish.com and facebook.com/rockandrollenglish. We'll catch you next time.